Now, unfortunately, I would actually point out that I think Wallerstein himself doesn't always pay attention to his warning there, but nonetheless, that is what he says. This is interesting, though. So I just want to start off here. Let's get into the actual article. Marx never reduced capitalism to a new mode of production.
Huh?
He considered all dimensions of modern capitalist society, understanding that the law of value does not regulate only capitalist accumulation, but rules all aspects of modern civilization.
So wait, how do modes of production not rule all aspects of civilization?
I mean, yeah, that question is a very important one. I think more fundamentally is just like Marx starts by talking about a new mode of production. And then from that, he talks about the kind of society erected around that new mode of production. And then that is what we call capitalism. So it's it's not reduced only to new mode of production, only in the sense that there are peripheral developments out of that new mode of production. But but it's not even technically right. This is just wrong on the face of it.
Right. I mean, like I could argue away, like, yeah, I could do what Jason just did and try to charitably say that was true. Like, like that he never reduced.
That is what I do. Yeah.
You're right. Like, yeah, he talked about the capitalist state. I mean, he had this big project, Hal Draper talks about in Marxist Theory of Revolution, that capital from the letters was going to be a much bigger thing, and it was going to start with the economics and then go through the politics, etc. Except the importance of the economics as he went through it seemed more and more important to Marx for explaining everything. And
like
also,
the state was supposed to be volume 4, and then it was going to be eventually volume 5, maybe, and probably it would have become volume 6 if Marx lived to 90. It would have become volume 7.
Right. I mean, and we kind of have what ended up being sort of kind of volume 4. Theories of Surplus Value, which is itself 3 volumes long. Yeah. Exactly. But it is interesting that we never really get there. And one thing you can really fault Marx for, and Marx is for, and we know this from his biography, that he was never comfortable with the political aspect of political economy. He normally farmed the journalism on that out to Engels and would go in and like gloss it with, economic interpretations. Like, with few exceptions, we get hints of Marxist theories of the capitalist states in the civil wars in France and in the Room and that also gives us hints of what could be called Marxist decadence theory, which is that the progressive notions of liberal bourgeois subjects hit the wall and trying to maintain property and, quote, regress back to feudal forms of government.
Wait, you mean that brand new thing which just started happening, which has made us into techno neo-feudalist society under our noses?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I think, that's the beginnings of a theory of the capitalist state. But we have to basically say that Marxist theory of the capitalist state as the ruling committee of the bourgeoisie is woefully underexplored. Right?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
All right. Let's get to the other things he said. But rules all aspects of modern civilization. Civilization talk is also weird. I mean, I know we have all this Marxist Sam Huntington talk these days, but like that has always struck me as bizarre that we have talk of civilization in anything. Like Marx is like, don't we take civilization as a given? I don't know.
That's one of those words that just, I guess, I don't have a problem with it, but again, it's like I might be injecting all of my own interpretation, and so in order to make it clear, it should be developed. There should be some, like a line, even, just to indicate exactly what that means.
That unique vision allowed him to offer the first scientific approach relating social relations to the wider realm of anthropology. I mean, anthropology barely existed when he wrote, but okay. In that perspective, he included in his analysis what today is called ecology, rediscovered after Marx. John Bellamy Foster, better than anybody else, has clearly developed this early intuition of Marx. Kohei Sato has complicated it. Anyway, so we have here, hey, that thing you think that Marx does, he didn't do that. Marx was also into anthropology and ecology, which is true. Although I would also argue that, like, you know who wrote more about both of those things for both good and ill? Engels, not Marx. Like,
Marx was only interested in those things very peripherally, in the sense that because there's a new mode of production, which is still unfolding, and because there is a new form of class society being crystallized around it in order to strengthen it and to preserve it. Questions of like anthropology and ecology, which are peripheral to the thing which is peripheral to the thing which is central to Marx, which Amin says he didn't do.
Right.
Yeah.
I also share. I'm skipping a paragraph about Varn and Sweezy, because for those who know me, you should know that I think those are the accidental two worst Marxist scholars in human history.
Yeah.
I don't think that they meant to be that bad. But I think them trying to marry the Bukharin view of monopoly capital to Fordism, and then people maintaining that even after Fordism's long gone, has been kind of a disaster in Marxist analysis. Because one of the assumptions of Varn and Sweezy is that the primary contradiction of capitalism was solved by basically management. I mean, that's more or less what they're saying. I also share another intuition of Marx, clearly expressed as early as 1848 and fully formulated until his last writings, that according to which capitalism represents only a short bracket in history. Oh, I hope that you are. I mean, in so much that all of human civilization that isn't hunter-gatherer represents a short bracket in history, sure.
I mean, on the, what is it? The anatomically modern humans appeared about 100,000 years ago. So
yeah,
sure.
and
and
we've had civilization for it might be more than that actually, but
I think that's wrong.
I think it's 200,000 years ago, and I think we even have evidence of abstract thinking and burial rites and stuff as early as 200,000 years ago.
233,000 years ago in Ethiopia. Yeah.
Thought I remembered stuff from when I was an anthropology student. All right.
Well, I took one anthropology class with you, Jason. Remember when we took that class together?
Oh, that was actually a really, really good class, because it was about
it was physical anthropology. Yeah.
It was about magic, witchcraft, and religion. And
we had 2 anthropology classes.
And about how a typical linear way of thinking goes. We graduate from magic into witchcraft, and we graduate from that into religion, and then we graduate from that into science. And he was like, a better way to understand it is a way which I now would say is dialectical. At the time,
but we took 2 classes then, because the one I was thinking about was the physical anthropology class, where we looked at all the different skulls and we had exams trying to categorize which one was which.
Oh yeah. When people was ask me well, if evolution's true, then where are the missing links? I was like, dude, they're fucking everywhere, all the time. Yeah.
This is another problem I have with David Graeber. I'm not going to get on, but his hostility to any form of evolutionary thought really pisses me off.
It's so weird. I don't understand that at all.
And people don't even pick up that he's hostile to it. And I'm like, oh yeah, he's very hostile to it. Anyway,
real weird.
But all right. I share another that represents a short bracket in history. Its historical function being to have created a short time, a century, the conditions calling for moving beyond communism, understood as a higher stage of civilization. That's kind of true. Except that I'll be honest, I keep on putting the birth of capitalism earlier and earlier, our bourgeois society earlier and earlier.
Didn't we say last time? Well, I said last time that an easy date is 1500.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's pretty much where I put it. is like shortly after 1492. And there's so many things that develop around that time period.
Although I think to have it be a recognizable, like no matter where you look, it's really more
that's
like
20th century.
1650 is when it starts to develop. But
well,
okay,
and I would
go ahead.
I would say of course, you people who've listened to us all together have heard me bring this up several times before. The northern Italian city-states, right, in the High Middle Ages, are developing what clearly looks to be a bourgeois society, but it's abortive.
Yep, I'm with you on that. I'm also I've read Brundall talk about that. You also see similar capitalist developments in monasteries in the 13th century, but they don't go very far because they're still in a largely feudal context. So
I would,
and some people
possibly,
like, that's the birth of capitalism. And I'm like, no, that's just market relations beginning something that would look like it, but like
that's closer to like a collectivist collectives engaging in a market than like anything close to capitalism.
And if you like A libertarians and B Jairus Banerjee think that any market with any form of currency equals capitalism, you start moving merchant capitalism Banerjee does this. He moves merchant capitalism all the way back to the fucking end of the Roman Empire.
There are elements of what becomes capital the Roman Empire. Will, but it doesn't go anywhere.
Well, the reason why Banerjee does this, just to completely explain them, he says that if whatever relation predominates, even if you're other relations, you are that thing. He doesn't really believe in hybrid forms, but then whenever he sees markets, which I don't think is actually the good marker for capitalism. I think wage labor plus banking are the two markers of capitalism. But anyway,
as a staunch Wickhamist, I have to disagree with him.
Yeah. But I tend to think Marx was overly optimistic about how quick it was going to be to overthrow capitalism. And I also think it's interesting that even Marxist-Leninists will say this without realizing that's what they're saying, when they're constantly saying, oh, we had to develop productive forces more. And I'm like, well, the more you say you had to develop productive forces, you're actually contradicting Engels while also citing off in the same book. And sometimes I'll even cite the paragraph I'm talking about without this part of it, where Engels says, oh, we need to develop productive forces, but by 1888, we already had enough to have communism.
Yeah, I think that the world that Marx was describing and the predictions which people like Kautsky made were all true from around the 1840s till around the 1940s. But the existence of the Soviet Union and the Allied states and the development of nuclear weapons, all of that changes the calculus. And so if what Marx was talking about is inevitable, was inevitable. And it did happen. And then it didn't happen. And then it started to change, and nothing else afterward can be said to be the same, whatever. We have to change our political calculus when conditions in the world changes. And I think the 1917 revolution is a world historic event, and that means that the world before it is different than the world after it.
Well, I mean, it is funny because he said when you meet people like who will argue that we already exist post-capitalism, and they'll find Engels in 1844 writing about Owenites and Fourierist in America as proof of the efficacy of communism, and then acting as if that's what communism means to later Engels and Marx post the manifesto, which is really funny because then they're like, then you're saying that they already thought America was a communist society in 1844, which is kind of a ridiculous claim. Like,
well, right, and also like the Owenites and the Fourierists, like at the furthest, the last remnants of the last expression of that kind of experimental attitude was like the Great Depression, and really it's more like the First World War. So like, if that's proof of something about communism, then what we have is proof that communism fails.
All right, so let's get into what he thinks decadence is. I'm just going to read a whole fucking section. The workers' and socialist movement has sustained itself on the vision of a series of revolutions beginning in the advanced capitalist countries. From the criticism which Marx and Friedrich Engels made of programs of the German social democracy to the conclusions derived from Bolshevism from the experience of the Russian Revolution, the workers' and socialist movements had never conceived of the transition to socialism on a world scale in any other way. However, over the past 70 years, the transformation of the world has taken other paths. The perspective of revolution has disappeared from the horizons of the advanced West, where socialist revolutions have been limited to the periphery of the system. My answer to you is, why have there been no more socialist revolutions since 1970 that have been successful, if that's true? 78 is literally when the name of developing national liberation movements moved from things like Pan-Arabism and Marxism into stuff like Islamism and stuff like that. And most of those revolutions also fail.
Right.
So
right.
It's just this claim seems like, well, history has changed, but we're also stopping history around 1975. Shut the fuck up. Like, anyway. These have been integrated developments of sufficient ambiguity for some people to see them only as a stage in the development of the expansion of capitalism to a world scale. Well, I wouldn't say some people. In most of these cases, what happened to these former colonies, even when they claim to be Marxist, with the exception of like 5 countries, Vietnam, Cuba, North Korea, although it's hard to say what that even is, China, and what else is left? Yeah, nobody.
I mean, it depends on it depends on the year, because like in Ethiopia, they maintained some fealty to Marxism Leninism until the 90s. And in Angola is the same until like the late 80s, I want to say.
But this is written in 2018, my friend.
Well, yeah, by the time he writes this, it's very clearly you have to ignore a whole lot of history in order to make this argument.
Right.
I mean, this feels like these are arguments I saw in the 60s and 70s where they were defensible, right? But
yeah,
it's hard to defend this now. And I think it's ironic because, remember, as I said, Samir Amin was highly ambivalent about the Arab Spring because he distrusted Islamists. So it's like, okay, but the major form of revolution in your area of the world now is not one you would support.
So how was he? What was it? What was his stance on like the Islamic Republic of Iran? And
I actually don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. He might be one of the many people who talked about the Islamic Republic of Iran as like Islamist Leninism without any Marxism, which I actually think is kind of probably true.
At one point, sure.
Yeah, I don't think it's true now, but I think it was true.
No.
I think it was true from like 7, like, and I mean this because the other societies I can think that did Leninism without Marxism, so they copied Leninist sales structures and developmental plans, but remained completely capitalist. The National Action Party of Singapore.
I mean, this is another example. This is another example of the reason why I think that our inability to properly reckon with the neoliberal restructuring of the world economy in the 1970s has been like fundamental to our miscalculations of everything else. Because there are some excusable reasons why you could say this or that about a developmentalist regime, even in spite of it not being technically a workers' movement. But like, it's kind of statified and it's kind of allied to the socialist world and whatever. You can make that case for a while. By the 80s, look around the world and everybody's they're in the same trap. And that means the political calculus has to change again. And we just haven't changed it since the fucking 2 generations ago.
It's sort of like ML's talking about Assad like he's his father, right?
Right.
And Syria like it was the Syria of the 1970s and 80s.
Instead of the Syria which participated in the Gulf War on the American side.
Right. Well, it just tells you don't trust the Americans. But
yeah. But
Which,
that,
I mean-
that is part of our of the need to change our political calculus. Is like look around the world and see what you actually have to do now. And so far, it's just doing the same thing still, no matter what.